The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade costs New Zealanders about $400 million a year. It's got approximately 1,300 staff, runs offices in over 50 countries, and administers about $500 million, just over $500 million a year worth of aid money. For those who are inclined to think that $400 million is too much for us to spend on the conduct of foreign relations, can I just remind you that last year as a country we earned roughly $58 billion in foreign exchange and exported goods to 189 countries. Can I just remind you that the government of which I'm a member has directed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to regard trade and economic objectives as our highest priority. We've also set a goal of lifting exports from 30% of our GDP to 40% of GDP. Now, I'm sure I've got no need to remind an audience such as this in Auckland that it will be the hard work, skill and entrepreneurial flair of private sector business people that will see those objectives met. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs does play a very important role in this respect. Negotiating trade agreements, creating bilateral relationships that are conducive to positive negotiations and trade, and unblocking the obstacles that really that frequently occur to obstruct trade are all key elements to our trading success. The Ministry also has other important tasks. We need good machinery to provide consular support for our citizens when they run into difficulties when travelling abroad, especially when they find themselves unexpectedly in a zone of conflict or unrest, as we saw recently in Egypt. And we need to play our part in the framework of multilateral organisations and processes that keep the world safe from nuclear weapons, counter terrorism, and promote fundamental principles like human rights, the rule of law and democracy. These are important tasks and they require specialist skills. In the 2009 budget, the first for the John Key-led government, we reversed roughly $23 million a year over 5 years of the so-called step change increase in the MFAT budget, which was part of the last budget of the previous government. And in the period since then, John Allen, the Chief Executive, and I have been looking at the configuration we've both inherited, tried to assess how it meets the country's needs going forward, and see what changes are needed to be made to ensure that New Zealand has a leaner and more adaptable foreign ministry, be able to meet the challenges of the future. You may be aware that budgets for departments of state have been flatlined going out into the future. What that means for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is that we'll hit a major brick wall in about 2 years' time as the cost of running increasingly expensive overseas posts collides with a constant income line. That is one of the major drivers of our change process. The other is an overriding commitment made by the key government while in opposition that would shift resources out of the back office in order to fund growth in frontline services. For the Ministry, that means the front line obviously means our representation overseas. So we're engaged in a major exercise to take, in an orderly and sustainable manner, costs out of administration and corporate services, both onshore and offshore, to fund increased capacity in the area of diplomatic and trade representation. Major changes are underway in relation to technology, capability and organisational design, and we've had to rethink the question of where we want to be represented offshore and in what way. We've had to understand the clear shift in economic power to the emerging economies and anticipate the increased pressures for representation in places where previously we have had none. One prediction I've seen is that the largest E7 emerging economies, that's China, India, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, Mexico and Turkey, will be bigger than the current G7, that's the US, Japan, Germany, UK, France, Italy and Canada, by 2020. That's only 9 years away. China's GDP may well overtake the United States in that same time. And India is on a trajectory to be the fastest growing large economy in the world. Then we have the Middle East and Africa to think about. Many are suggesting that Africa will present very significant economic opportunities in the time ahead. My own view, for what it's worth, is that in 10 years' time, business people will be saying about economic opportunity in Africa, what we hear them say about India today, and what we heard them say about China 10 years ago. New Zealand has only one post in Africa, in Pretoria. Two, if you stretch a point and call Cairo an African post. Some of you will know that there are more diplomats based in Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union, than there are stationed in Brussels. Not everyone knows that. More diplomats in Addis Ababa than there are in Brussels, the centre of the EU.